Maya, Eli, Tasha, and Roman were 4 friends from Houston. They had saved money for months to go to Thailand. They had a small budget, a short itinerary, and a basic plan. 10 days, 2 cities, beaches, food, and a few day trips. No nightlife, no tours, no complicated treks, no risky detours. When they landed in Bangkok close to midnight, they took a taxi from the airport, checked into a modest hotel near a main road, and went out to find food, because staying in the room on the first night felt like surrender. They kept the walk brief, ate, and headed back in a second taxi, tired but satisfied that the trip had started on schedule. The taxi slowed at a temporary checkpoint marked by cones and a folding table. 2 officers stepped out. One tapped the trunk, the other opened the rear door and asked to see the passengers. The request was standard and came in a steady voice. The 4 handed over their passports and were told to present their bags. Eli, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, set his backpack on the table and unzipped it. A small vape pen lay in an inside pocket. He had not used it in Thailand. Tasha had put it there during packing in Houston. The officer who found it did not raise his voice. He said the item was a problem, repeated the word station. He said the process would take a long time. He did not write anything down and did not mention an official receipt. He named a cash amount of 30,000 baht, which is over $900. They asked whether a warning was possible. The officer repeated station in long time and added that a report could keep them for hours. Another man stood a few steps away, as if his presence explained everything. Roman suggested paying a fine at a police desk. The officer shook his head. The message did not change. Tasha walked to an ATM on the corner, withdrew cash and counted the bills on the edge of the table. The vape pen went into a clear bag with a sticker. The cash went somewhere they could not see. Their passports were returned without comment. The officer told them to go. They got back into the taxi and rode the remaining distance in silence. They slept in short stretches with the air conditioner loud in the corner of the room. In the morning, they moved on with the part of the plan that was still intact. They booked a same-day flight to Phuket, telling each other that the city incident was a one-off and that the beach would put the trip back on rails. They arrived in the afternoon, checked into a mid-range local hotel near the water, and walked the promenade to measure the place and settle their nerves. They agreed to keep the next day uncomplicated, swim, rest, and one short rental on the water to get the initial excitement out of the way. On the second day, Eli rented a jet ski from a stand that had a laminated price sheet and a stack of nylon wrist straps. The operator clipped a strap to Eli and pointed at the safe zone, then gave a thumbs up. Eli took a quick arc through the bay and returned within the hour. When he beached the machine, the operator crouched, ran his hand along the hull, and stopped at a pale scuff near the bow. He stood and said, there was damage from coral. He named a sum of 20,000 baht and held up 2 fingers twice to make the number plain. Eli said the scuff had been there. Operator did not answer. 2 men approached and stood on either side of the machine. One carried a clipboard and filled a line on a pre-printed form. He did not show it to Eli. He said calling police would increase the cost. Roman said they would wait for police and see what an officer thought. A uniformed officer arrived in minutes. He greeted the operator first. Then he asked Eli how much he could pay to resolve the situation. He did not examine the hull, did not ask who had used the machine before, and did not check the laminated sheet for terms. He suggested a compromise at half the amount, 10,000. The operator folded his arms and watched without speaking. The decision did not feel like a decision. The 4 counted out the money. The clipboard man wrote a receipt in pen. The ink blurred where sweat touched it. The officer left without adding anything to the record. The operator resumed his work as if nothing unusual had happened. Back at the hotel, they did a quick accounting of losses so far and tried to plan a day that did not involve vendors or beach rentals. They decided to rent scooters from a shop behind the hotel and ride inland on a marked route. The rental desk took photos of their passports and held a deposit in cash. The scooters were fueled and ready. The clerk traced a simple loop on a paper map and told them the road would be clear except for construction near a bridge. They set out with Eli and Roman in front and Maya and Tasha behind. On a narrow stretch through rubber trees, a blue SUV appeared in the mirrors and stayed close. Roman waved it past. It did not pass. It closed the gap and matched their speed. Eli moved to the side of the lane to make room. The SUV touched the rear of his scooter and knocked it offline. He fell and slid on his side, scraping palms and knee. The SUV braked, and two men stepped out. Their manner did not include warnings or shouting. One showed a knife. The other pulled Eli's wrist up and stripped the watch. He said phones in a flat voice and extended a hand. Roman took a step forward and stopped when the second man displayed a handgun at waist level. Maya said Eli's name without a plan. Tasha froze with her hands open. The men returned to the SUV with the watch and two phones and drove away without haste. An officer arrived in a pickup within minutes and asked what was taken. He wrote down the items and values and said the robbers were likely foreign professionals. He did not speculate further. A medic, who rode with the officer, cleaned Eli's knee, applied gauze, and secured it with tape. The officer handed over a case number and advised them to avoid that road. He said patrols would be increased and that nearby cameras might have caught the SUV. The four nodded and stood in the rain until the officer left. They righted the scooters and rode back to the hotel with traffic flowing around them, as if nothing had happened. In the room, they moved from shock to repair. They used a laptop to change passwords and log out of accounts tied to the stolen phones. They called a bank to report a card at risk and waited in a queue with recorded assurances that the call mattered. They listed items for insurance and submitted a preliminary report through a web form that confirmed a ticket number by email. They cleaned Eli's palms again and rewrapped the knee with supplies from a pharmacy on the corner. They reviewed options and concluded that getting off the island was the next step. Leaving by ferry was cheaper and available on short notice. They bought tickets for the morning sail to Koh Samui and arrived at the pier with time to spare. Ferry left on schedule. The sea was manageable for the first hour. Then the wind accelerated and wave height increased. The bow rose and fell hard. The hull shuddered under each impact. People braced their feet. Bags shifted on racks. Crew secured doors and told passengers to remain seated. Eli adjusted the bandage to slow the bleeding through his shorts. Maya and Tasha focused on breathing and staying calm. Roman said nothing and watched the water break over the bow. The intense period lasted long enough to replace confidence with calculation. When the island's outline appeared and the motion eased, they felt a practical relief rather than joy. The boat docked. The ramp went down. They walked off without comment. On Samui, they rented a small bungalow with a working kitchen and decided to limit movement to essential errands. They bought basic groceries, cooked simple meals, and monitored Eli's knee for infection. They held off on excursions and tours and used the remaining days to put some distance between themselves and the last three incidents. At night, they reviewed the remaining balances in their accounts and adjusted the plan to avoid extra charges. They kept to a moderate routine and waited for the return flight. On the final morning, they packed early and rode to the airport. Security pulled Eli's backpack from the belt and set it on a table. A young officer opened a side pocket and removed a silver vape cartridge. Eli had not remembered it was inside. The officer called a supervisor who walked over with a steady expression and set the cartridge on the table. He said the item was prohibited and that a report would be required. He said the process could be long. He waited. Eli asked whether there was a standard fine. The supervisor repeated that a report would be required and that the process could be long. The meaning was unambiguous. Eli handed over cash. The supervisor put the cartridge into a drawer and returned the passport. There was no paper trail. They passed through the checkpoint and sat at the gate without discussion. The flight to Bangkok boarded on time, and the connection home was uneventful. They spoke very little on either leg. In Houston, they each went to their apartments and sent messages to family members that said simply that they were back. The four told the story in order and kept the descriptions narrow so that the chain of events could be understood. They described the checkpoint amount, the jet ski amount, the robbery on the road, the ferry storm interval, and the airport payment. They sent photos as verification. One showed the ink-smeared receipt from the jet ski stand. One showed the taillights of the SUV as it left the trees. One showed Eli's wrist after the watch was pulled away, with the imprint still visible around the bone. The responses ranged from relief to criticism to advice for the next time. A cousin sent a short message that said it could have been worse. No one contradicted it. In the days that followed, they handled the administrative side. Eli filed a claim for the watch and used a copy of the police slip as evidence. Roman replaced his phone and restored what he could from cloud backup. Tasha contacted the bank again to close a case that had been opened as a precaution. Maya wrote out a clear timeline while the details were still fresh so that if the claim required a statement, they would not have to reconstruct from memory. They compared notes about what to do on future trips and stuck to simple guidelines. Avoid handing over original passports except where unavoidable. Minimize what goes into pockets and bags. Check every compartment before security. Record serial numbers of electronics. Photograph the condition of rented equipment before use. Agree in advance on a maximum cash limit for resolving an issue without a paper trail. The list did not make them feel like experts. It made them feel prepared to avoid repeating the same sequence with the same results.